Hello and welcome back to Clear Insights, a podcast brought to you by your friends at the Clarity Coalition, where we add a little bit of clarity to stories that go often overlooked. Folks, there are places in the world where massacres happen and it gets zero coverage. This past Easter in Nigeria, reportedly 180 people were massacred, yet there's been no global outrage, no online movement. The question is why? With me answering that question is Douglas Burton, a former U.S. State Department official and independent journalist who focuses much of his work on documenting the persecution and genocide of Christian communities in Nigeria. Douglas, thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks, Mike.
So, Douglas, in our conversations together offline, you've said that Nigeria is in a civilizational crisis, much like the United States. What does that look like on the ground in Nigeria?
Mike, civilizational crisis is something that I've been thinking about for years. I'm a war reporter. I've been an editor at the Washington Times. I've been an opinion editor. I've been a State Department officer in Iraq during the occupation. I've been in situations where people are being killed every day, where I hear gigantic booms 2 or 3 times a day. And I know that every time I hear a boom, 50 to 60 people have been blown away in Baghdad. That was my life for a couple of years. What I encountered there, I've thought about since I left Iraq in 2007, and I came back to the United States. I got a little bit engaged in conservative politics. I'm a supporter of the president, and I watch news media. I care a lot about religion and news media. And what I see that's remarkable in Nigeria, where I've been engaged I've been writing about it for 7 years. I've been the editor of truthnigeria.com for 3 full years. Although I've only been to Nigeria once, I'm psychically in Nigeria every single day because I'm talking to Nigerian eyewitnesses, I'm talking to war reporters, I'm talking to spokesmen, and I'm reading their comments on social media and on messaging services every day. So the thing that strikes me is their existential dilemma. That is, what that means is how they have to make basic decisions about survival, about the destiny and the track of their country, and how it strikes me as so similar in a way to what we're going through in the United States, and especially to people like me. Many of my friends, they care about the destiny of the United States. They believe in American history. They believe the United States is a very privileged country. It's an exceptional country from the time of its founding 250 years ago, and they believe that the nation is in some mystical way guided by the hand of God, either indirectly or directly. And the folks that I've met in Nigeria, they also believe that their lives are in the hands of God, because the people in Nigeria are intensely religious. It's part of their culture. And the war that they've been going through, the civil war, which has been so deadly to Christians and some non-Christians, it has religious aspects, it has economic aspects as well. But the chief challenge that Nigerians have, that's actually quite similar to what the American people have, is defining what it is that is causing the dislocation and the confusion and the crisis in our country politically, and in other ways too. So the best way that I can sum it up is we in the United States are in a civilizational crisis, simply because in the last 20 or 30 years there has ceased to be a consensus in our country about meaning, about what truth is. And there's a similar kind of problem for the Nigerian people. They can't come to a consensus about what it is that's causing what is the root cause of their civilizational conflict. Let me give you an example. When you had a Supreme Court justice a couple of years ago who came up before U.S. Supreme Court, you know, interrogation committee, that is uh, Justice uh, Helen Ketanji Brown, Helen Ketanji Jackson, she was asked by the senator from Tennessee, "Can you define a woman?" And she couldn't do it. She said, "Well, I can't define it a woman. I'm not a biologist." It's a remarkable response and indicative of of the cognitive situation we are in as a nation. Okay, uh, another example. Say we went through a traumatic experience as a nation through COVID from 2000, late 2000 until 2023. Actually, what exactly was the cause of COVID? Where did it come from? We thought we knew from the beginning in December 2000. We thought it came from a wet market in Southeast China. But within a few months, it was clear that the origin of COVID probably was not from an animal in the wet market, but it came from the Wuhan weapons laboratory of the Chinese government. It was an engineered disease, a virus that was created by the Chinese government itself, and it got out of the lab somehow. So the American people no longer have their trust in their administrative state. They do not trust the agencies, the administrative organs that govern science, that govern medicine after COVID. They do not trust the authorities in their educational system after the wars we've had over the last couple of years over gender, over the definition of what a male or a female is, over the trans issues. The American people are really divided, deeply divided, over educational policies that have put boys into girls' dressing rooms, and that have upended the received truths about what human beings are. Give you another example, immigration. There is such a deep divide in this country about border policy, for example. We have a very closely divided Congress and Senate. It's deeply divided over border policy, and there's no longer a consensus about citizenship, about who should be allowed to come into this country. Of course, the president has been successful in closing the border. He has the support of the Congress regarding building the wall and so forth. But that consensus could disappear in just a couple of months at the midterm elections. It could very easily happen that the border policy set up by this administration would be reversed if just a handful of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives were to change in November of this year. So we are in a state where the policies changes, and the reason policies change is because truth changes, because there isn't a consensus about what is true. Okay, I hope I've made that case. Now, in Nigeria, there's something similar going on. The people in the folks in Nigeria who are Christian, that's one half of the country. It's the most populous country in Africa. They have been brainwashed by their government to believe that the cause of the so-called Nigerian genocide, the Christian genocide against them, that it is not caused by Islamism. It's not caused by sectarian hatred. They've been brainwashed to think that they cannot even name ethnicity. They can't even name religious differences when they talk about the people who are rushing into their villages at night and massacring, dozens, scores, over 100 people. They're not supposed to say what the religion of those people is. If they do say that, the news media will not report it. The policemen will, and the army spokesman will tell the village leaders that saying who did the massacre, saying that they are members of a certain religion or a certain ethnicity, is actually unpatriotic. that it's actually inciting tribal divisions to even say that. You see, there are speech controls which go against common sense in Nigeria, just as there are speech controls that affect human behavior in the United States. when we hear about the transgender boy who wants to change clothes in a girl's locker room, we're not supposed to object to it. We're not supposed to be upset about it. We're supposed to condemn the parents who are completely freaked out, and they're traumatized by the fact that the public school system would allow this thing to happen. So we are, in both countries, we are facing new realities. That we're facing political agendas that are not only political, but they're actually deeper than that. They're cognitive agendas. They are philosophical agendas, which many people whose lives are guided by common sense are actually deeply disturbed by.
So, for the person who doesn't know anything, and pretend for a second that I don't know anything, how did this civilizational crisis in Nigeria start? What are its origins?
You know, first of all, Nigeria is a very big and in many ways a sophisticated country. It has dozens of universities. It is part of the modern world, and at the same time, much of the population is part of the pre-modern world, because half the population is not very well educated, and so religion is primary and is decisive in defining what people believe in. We can see that in Nigeria was created as a country in 1914 by the British. It was granted independence in 1960. It was undergoing rapid Christianization when it was governed by the British in the 20th century, and by 1960, Christianity was spreading by leaps and bounds. The northern part of the country has had a base of Islamic affiliation going back many centuries, but 200 years ago, there began an Islamic conquest by a Sahelian sheikh named Usman Den Fodio, who began to conquer territories in northern Nigerian basin in order to create a caliphate centered upon himself that would bring the true religion, the pure religion of Sunni Islam, over all the territories of the Niger Basin. There did not exist at that time a nation state called Nigeria. There were dozens of little kingdoms and hundreds of tribal entities. So the modern world has only come to the Niger Basin since the 19th century. And in the 20th century, there has been one of the greatest genocides the world has ever seen. There was the genocide that happened in southeast Nigeria from 1967 till 1970, and that was the Civil War, known as the Biafran breakaway movement, where up to 3 million people lost their lives in that fratricidal war. In the meantime, the nation recovered and has done its best to mend the wounds of that genocidal war, and it has attempted to become a successful constitutional democracy, and is considered and it is an ally of the United States. It's the most important ally for the United States in Africa, because it's the kingpin nation. It's the key. It's the nation that is the linchpin for all of West Africa, biggest and most influential, and there's 10 smaller states that are keyed in on the economy of Nigeria. So the war, or the crisis in Nigeria, is a crisis of Islamism, which has steadily increased since 9/11. Americans know that in 9/11, our concept of who was the enemy, it suddenly became acutely aware of the fact that uh, that many groups in the Middle East hate Americans or want to establish a a new governance based on Islamism. And Mike, you yourself, having Egyptian roots in the Christian religion of Egypt, you are very much aware of the conflict between in expansive, invasive, and intolerant fundamentalist Islamism and Christianity. Well, that is the source of the conflict in Nigeria. Nigerians have pretty much two major religions. Nearly half of the people are Muslim, not necessarily radical Muslims. They are practicing Muslims, and about almost half of the people are Christians. All right, spread out over many different denominations, and then a small percentage of maybe 3 and 4% are traditional worshipers. They are animists, or they are worshiping the ancient natural religions. So the crisis for Nigerians is they have to choose between the modern world and the world of science, which is guided by the ideas of fairness, equal rights for all, supposedly, which is theoretically, which is enshrined in the Nigerian Constitution, which in some ways is similar to the U.S. Constitution, or they must choose to go another way. And what we've seen in the last 26 years is an increasing enthusiasm among some elements in Nigeria to choose the way of Islamist fundamentalism, or what I like to say Islamism, okay, which is different from Islam. It is a very intolerant very fundamentalist form of Islam that can be traced chiefly to the form of Islam, the Islamic purification movement called Wahhabism, which was created by Saudi tribal leaders in the 1740s in the center of the Saudi peninsula. So Wahhabism has developed and has evolved into a virulent form of Islamism known as Salafism through the Muslim Brotherhood in the early 1900s, and then Salafism was the set of ideas that generated or influenced the creation of Al-Qaeda in the 1980s, and Al-Qaeda evolved into the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, also known as ISIS, and that is the ideology which powers the insurgencies which are behind the civil war in Nigeria. But in addition, and this is something a very important part of the reporting of TruthNigeria.com, is that a very big part of the conflict, of the threat against Christians, comes from a group of bandit or criminal gangs in Nigeria who are radicalized, they are extremely intolerant toward Christians, and are responsible for killing more Christians in Nigeria than Boko Haram or Al-Qaeda. And these are men who are part of criminal gangs, invariably called bandit gangs, but now more often called terrorist bandit gangs in Nigerian media. And these folks are responsible for massacring large numbers of Christians in the northern and middle belt parts of Nigeria. This is the conflict where Truth Nigeria dedicates the majority of its space, is telling the factual story of the tens of thousands of innocent, unarmed, unfortunate Nigerian people who have been caught up in these waves of killings and kidnappings, which has caused so much misery, and which we are hoping to bring an end to by just raising awareness by simply telling the truth. So the antidote for the civilizational crisis, Mike, is simply to raise awareness about what is the case, to bring consensus based upon three things: to bring consensus based upon science, secondly, based upon logic or common sense, and third, based upon the wisdom of the Holy Bible. It's just the wisdom of the Bible, which Muslims already agree with, because their own scriptures include many of the scriptures that are in the Christian Bible. So this is the kind of approach of Truth Nigeria, and it's explained in the About Us page, which is on the truthnigeria.com website. I encourage you to go there, truthnigeria.com. It's a website just started really about just a little short of 3 years ago by a wonderful man, missionary, Judd Saul, who is the founder of a humanitarian missionary group called Equipping the Persecuted. It's also a good idea to go there, equippingthepersecuted.org, especially if you would like to help my reporter friends make a living by telling the truth about this civilizational crisis. I hope that makes sense to you.
It does. It does make sense. You were talking about things that are underreported that, sort of escape the news radar. One of the things that I had no idea about until you brought it to my attention were the kidnapping camps. We've now heard about kidnapping camps in Nigeria where women and children are held, abused, and forcibly converted. How central are these camps to what is happening to the Christians of Nigeria?
Well, Mike, it's a secondary issue, but yeah, thanks for bringing this up. By the way, I can direct you to a story that I published in the Washington Times just a few days ago. It's under my byline. It's about a large group of hostages who are being held in a camp in northern Nigeria by kidnappers who are trying to get a very big ransom from their relatives. Nigeria has this huge kidnapping industry. It has lots of crime. I mean, it's a very complex society, and kidnapping goes on, in countries around the world. It happens to be very important as a funding source for the Nigerian insurgencies and these criminal gangs that I mentioned earlier, who are part of basically one ethnicity. It's called the Fulani tribe. There are dozens and dozens of these gangs of kidnappers in the northern and middle belt who kidnap people, hold them for long periods of time as hostages until the relatives can pay a ransom for them, and then they will repatriate their hostages, but sometimes the hostages don't survive. Sometimes they will not give them back to their relatives, and the relatives in Nigeria, who are often low-income farmers, will pay somewhere between $2,000, $3,000, sometimes $5,000 per head to recover their relatives, from torture in these camps. Now, keep in mind that this industry is bankrupting Christian families. It's not only Christians who get kidnapped, of course. Sometimes Muslims are getting kidnapped. However, what Truth Nigeria has found is that in the majority of cases, especially in the Middle Belt, most of the people who are getting kidnapped by these radicalized gangs are Christians. And this is part of the so-called Christian genocide that's happening in 12 or 13 states in the Middle Belt of Nigeria. And we have done very close studies of the kidnapping industry, and we found that just in one state alone, it's a big state in north central Nigeria called Kaduna, there's a huge kidnapping industry that is facilitated by the the governor and by the state officials, by the military, and by the police itself. And this kidnapping industry in just one state of Kaduna generates close to $2 million a year. That $2 million goes a long way in a country where, the annual income is less than $1,000. For many people, annual income is only about $700 or $800 a year. You'll find that people even in the biggest city they got in Lagos, you will find that most people will have an annual income. They'll have an annual salary of less than $6,000 or $7,000 a year. Although some people in Lagos are millionaires, they make much more. But throughout the nation of Nigeria, you have just millions and millions of very poor people. So these ransoms that they have to pay to get their relatives back bankrupts them as producers, and the churches are bankrupted by it. So if you extrapolate across the 16 states in the Middle Belt across Nigeria, and study how the kidnapping industry affects the Christian population, you can see that it's having a devastating effect. It's not only having a financial effect; it's having a cultural. It's having a security impact on the people, and it's completely underreported. Truth Nigeria is the only news agency that has done 19 documentaries about this practice in the central part of the country. And we have documented the location of these camps. We know there's at least 5 or 6 of these camps in the central part of the country, in Kaduna and in Nasarawa state, and in Benue state. We know that where these camps are. We've done maps showing where they are, and there are hundreds. We estimate that in one large camp south of the city of Kaduna, near the border with Niger State, there's a set network of camps that we have identified as the Rajana camp system that has up over 1,000 people at any one time in this network of camps. They're held for long periods of time. The government knows about them. There are military bases in the vicinity of these camps, and the government has had public events where they have boasted about rescuing hostages from the Rajana area and bringing them forward into freedom. However, the government is apparently embarrassed by the fact that Truth Nigeria has done 19 stories subsequently about this network, and the government will not answer telephone calls from our reporters, never acknowledges or corroborates what we are saying, but the evidence is completely obvious. It is flagrantly true. So one of the experts on genocide is Dr. Greg Stanton, who's the creator of Genocide Watch. He has told us that the atrocities and the tortures that are being visited upon these victims in the camps, it is in fact a war crime. It should be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Therefore, it's critically important that the U.S. government and also the humanitarian institutions, the non-government organizations give attention to the atrocities of the kidnapping industries, which is devastating Christianity. The longer we allow this to happen, the more devastating it becomes.
Yeah, this gets zero attention. Absolutely zero. If it weren't for your journalism, it would be even worse, which is insane to think that in the most populous country in Africa, there are kidnapping camps, and you simply don't hear about it. Why is it that violence against Nigerian Christians fails to get traction online? I mean, I remember when I think it was 2014 or 2015 when Boko Haram was running rampant across Nigeria, there was a bit of a campaign there. Why wasn't that able to sustain steam? Is it because some narratives are boosted while others are ignored?
Good question. Frankly, I've been in media all of my life, 40 years. I worked for the Washington Times for 19 years. I've been a freelancer. I've been an independent journalist for several years. I've written for a dozen different publications. Just why does this topic not get into the dashboard of more media in this country? And as someone who's studied media, and religion and other things, I can say that there's a couple of things. First of all, the topic itself, it's far away, and American media typically does not cover social problems or crises that happen in other countries, right? So that's one thing. The people in other countries, they would like to, be in the, they'd like to be in the viewfinder of the American reader more often, but the Americans find it difficult to relate to people in other countries. Now, one of the advantages of Nigeria for a reporter like myself, and one reason I started getting into this topic 7 years ago, is that Nigeria is an English-speaking nation. Everyone in Nigeria speaks some English. However, here's another problem is the nature of the conflict in Nigeria is extremely complex. The Nigerian people are separated into somewhere between 300 and 600 tribes, each tribe which has its own dialect. So it's very hard to figure out that way, right? When there are stories about atrocities, for example, or attacks, the name of the tribe comes out. So that puts some people off. The name of the locations is odd. It's based upon a language which people can't figure out. Now there's another factor, and that is that the government itself try to spike the story as much as they can, because the fact of the matter is that the ruling people, I mean the governing party, whoever it is in Nigeria, which for several years, since 2015, it has been a Muslim government. The government itself stands to benefit from the West not figuring out what's happening, because the government authorities are often complicit, are often collaborative in the crime itself. They are actually benefiting from it, because the criminal parties who are taking over land, they're creating a genocide against Christians, gaining a material benefit that the Muslim parties themselves are a party to. So that is a problem. Now, how does the government manage to confuse the public and use the complexity to confuse reporters even more than they would be ordinarily? Well, first of all, as I said earlier, the government controls media. Nigeria doesn't have a completely free press. There's not, as my boss has said, Judd Saul, it doesn't have a free press because the government has all the power. Now, the government don't have hate speech laws like some European countries do have, but it controls the free press through money. When the government wants a story to get out about a problem, whether it's a dam that's broken or if there's a terrible attack on a Christian community, for example, the government has a press conference. The army usually will have a press conference and invite the reporters to come in to a certain location and hear about it. Now, the reporters who are invited and who come to the press conference, they will leave that event and usually they'll be given a packet of money. They'll be given cash, which would be unthinkable in a Western context, but that's very common in the third world. So they get the money to go to the event. Now they're expected to write stories that are not contrary to what the government believes is the case. That's one thing. Secondly, now I know this is true because the 10 reporters that are part of the Truth Nigeria team, most of them have been professional reporters, and they've gone to these press conferences, and they've received those packets of money, and they're very grateful that they don't have to take money from the government anymore. Secondly, the government makes it clear that there are certain guidelines on how things are supposed to be reported. So the government will report, say, the number of people that have been killed in an attack, but they won't report it in a timely way. So after, say, an attack where 30 people were killed, they won't give a report for 3 days. This is atypical. Well, usually they'll undercount the number of people who were victims of the attack. Instead of 30 people, they'll say 10 people, for example. They will not give key information. They will not say the ethnicity of the people that did the attack. But in fact, in the majority of the attacks that happen in the Middle Belt, it's done by one group of people, a criminal group that speaks one language. They speak the Fulani language, which is the language of one of the largest tribes in Nigeria. The Fulani people, who are overwhelmingly Muslim, and many of them are associated with the cattle herding industry, and the government will use a euphemism for these people. They will call them herders instead of Fulani people, or they'll call them bandits. They'll give them a cloaking term. That's one of the disingenuous conceits that the government uses to hide the fact that there's one ethnicity that is part of the ethnic cleansing. Okay, the Fulani people are very talented folks, and it's one of the most powerful tribes, by the way, in Africa. It's a very large tribe in Nigeria, and many of the members of the Nigerian government, in their security establishment, in their army, in their air force, and their police force, they are Fulani people. Okay, they're not criminals simply because they're members of this tribe, but some of them probably are compromised. Some of them are probably double dealing, playing a dual role, and that is why Nigeria has a huge crime problem. So, number two is the media doesn't tell the truth. I'll give you an example of a story I was just working on today, Mike. There was we do an account every week. We do an overview story telling how many people were killed across Nigeria, in a 7-day period. So our story today, for the number of people in Nigeria who were killed from April 20th to April 26th, it's a story about how 69 people have been killed in 11 different states, right? Now we noticed that just yesterday, on Sunday, there were 2 major attacks, and one of them was an attack in the state of Adamawa, close to the northeastern part of the country, and 30 people were killed. 20 of them were killed leaving a church just yesterday on Sunday evening, right, in Adamawa, in a local governance area, a county, say, called Gombe, right? Well, I did a Google search, and that story, I found out this story. It was on a news service called TG News. It's done by a friend of mine, Tom Garba. He had the story completely because he's a Christian. He has good sources in Adamawa. But you'd be surprised, although that story was 20 hours old, no other Nigerian media had it. Not a single one. Only Tom Garba had that story, and the other source we had was the church, the denomination whose church was attacked. I mean, for a story like that, 30 people killed. Like, imagine this was in the United States. 30 people were killed, say, in San Antonio, Texas, right? Or anywhere in Texas. 30 people were killed, and 20 hours later, only one news service, and not a major one at that, has the story. Something is up. It's extremely odd. Okay, as a news guy, I know that this is signs of this story being suppressed. And this happens all the time in Nigeria. Sometimes in a state like Benue, a central state, there are massacres almost every week. And you will not get a report from the authorities for 3 days. When you get a report, it's an inaccurate report, always the undercount. So there's manipulation by media. And number 3.
Before you continue any further, I want to touch on something that you mentioned just so we don't skip it later. Because you said something that was very specific that I've heard myself come up quite a bit anytime reading about Nigeria. What apologists will do is that they will use the exact words you used. They'll use the word farmer herder conflict. I hear this a lot from so called academics trying to, present Nigeria as being something other than a genocide. Can you shed light on what might be going on in academia with how the conflict in Nigeria is studied and how it's presented?
Yeah, is exactly right. The fact, there has been an ongoing controversy for years about what is the root cause of terrorism in Nigeria. And the paradigm cited by many academics, and especially a very trusted third party group, it's an academic contractor called the International Crisis Group, from where I think this phrasing, farmer herder conflict, actually originated several years ago. They have insisted, and many other agencies as well, want to argue that what's happening is really is not a sectarian conflict at all. This is possibly due to a bias against Christianity in general, but the claim is that there are so-called conflicts between herders and farmers all over Africa, and this is true, right? There are clashes between tribal groups in Nigeria and all over Africa over territory, over access to resources. Now, the government of Nigeria likes this explanation and insists upon it. The First Lady of Nigeria came into Washington for a charm tour about 2 months ago, in the early part of, I think it was in February, I believe. Okay, and her point was that she was telling news media, whoever she could get to come to dinner with her, she was telling them that that in this conflict, this serious conflict in Nigeria, the victims of this conflict are both Muslims and Christians. It's not one side or the other. This is partly true because certain parts of Nigeria, like the northeastern part, are majority Muslim. That's where Boko Haram began its insurgency in 2009 around the Lake Chad area. But in a state like Borno, which borders Lake Chad, most of the people are Muslim, right? However, there are pockets of Christians, and always have been, in the Lake Chad area. And one of the towns where there is an enclave of Christians is the town of Gwoza, which is on the border in the Mandara Mountain area on the border between Nigeria and Cameroon. Okay, and that's where a great many Christians were killed in this last week. In our attack report, we've included an item about 18 Christians who were killed in the town of Gwoza this last week. That is a case whereby there is a disproportionate number of Christians killed, and because they are Christians. Gwoza has been attacked dozens and dozens of times because it is an enclave of Christianity. Okay, so the government likes this explanation, and the U.S. government likes this explanation. I spent a couple of years with the State Department, and we had guidelines for how we could describe the conflict. And the State Department has had guidelines in Nigeria about how to explain the conflict. Some of my friends have been foreign service officers in Abuja, and their general approach, their general frame of explaining casualties in these conflicts is that they are understood as communal clashes. Very, very misleading. Yes, there are conflicts between tribes. Yes, there are some communal clashes in Nigeria. Yes, there is competition for resources, but it is not a fair and accurate way of explaining what's happening to the people. The organization for the Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa, a group called ORFA, which is based in the is based in Belgium, is the gold standard for understanding the loss of life in Nigeria. And according to ORFA, there are every 10 lives lost in this genocidal conflict in Nigeria, 6 of those lives are Christians. There's a disproportionate number of Christians killed all over the Middle Belt. So this paradigm is very pernicious and very misleading, because it's based on half-truths. And when you talk to the victims, and this is what I learned when I started doing my initial stories as a complete neophyte 7 years ago, I began calling up the victims that I could find online, and through my telephone contacts, I began calling up victims in the Middle Belt and doing my stories 7 years ago. And I found out that when there are attacks, the government will give the numbers of people killed, but they will not give the identity of the attackers, nor will they will not give the religious identity of the victims. But you will find that 80% of the victims of massacres are Christians. And you'll find it all over the North, all over the Middle Belt. So by concealing this fact, here's the bottom line. By concealing the identity of the perpetrators, and by concealing the religious nature of the victims, the media and the U.S. government, our own State Department, have occluded a very key fact, which is needed by our national security apparatus to solve this problem. We have prevented the identification of the identity of the cause of the problem. But it is often argued that these communal clashes are caused by secondary factors like global warming, for example. Yeah, there is global warming in Africa. It's been going on for decades and decades. But is it causing people to? Is it forcing the herding peoples to attack the farming peoples? Absolutely not. I'll give you a counterexample. There's global warming in Kenya. And there's a very well-known tribe called the Maasai, who are cattle herders. Okay, they're world famous for being expert cattle herders. Okay, do we have a problem of Maasai tribesmen doing mass massacres of people in Kenya who are in their way? No, you do not have this. You do not have a history of massacres by Maasai people. No, it's a peace-loving tribe, and they're 100% Muslim. They're not killing people. Why is this happening in Nigeria? Well, it's happening because there is an ethnicity that has it has in its credo and it's in its received culture. It's a culture of conquest. Since the conquest of the Niger Basin began in 1804 by Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio, there has been a resolute continuation of this warrior ethos in the Fulani people who are into cattle herding. That's not all the Fulani people, but there's hundreds of thousands of them are into this industry. So Truth Nigeria has documented the perniciousness of the farmer-herder crisis as a one-size-fits-all explanation. Let's just step back a little bit. Let's look at the Bible that everyone knows something about. Was there a farmer-herder crisis in the opening pages of the book of Genesis? Well, you could say there was. In the creation story, Adam and Eve had 2 sons. Cain was one, the eldest son, and Abel was the younger son, right? Now, what was Cain's business? Now, Cain was a farmer, and Abel was a herder, correct? And Cain killed his brother. Now, that's the reverse of the farmer-herder crisis in Nigeria, but it shows that if you want to force this explanation in an inappropriate way, you can say that it was a farmer-herder crisis that resulted in the murder of Abel, in the book of Genesis. In fact, the Genesis account does suggest that there was a competition between 2 tribes or two two economic systems, farming and herding, from the very beginning, of mankind. Okay, but when we talk to as journalists, when we talk to the victims of the conflict in Nigeria, it is abundantly evident, it's commonsensical, and it's empirically 100% clear that the victims of most of these conflicts, most of these attacks, they are Christians.
It's very, very clear to see that it disproportionately affects Christians. As you said yourself, it's 80% Christians that are killed as a result of these attacks. Um, I want to kind of move on to a slightly more uncomfortable topic, one that I know you don't have any problem talking about, but it's one that I can sort of relate to as someone whose family's Coptic. Um, there's a bit of complicity between the Coptic Church and the Egyptian state in the sense that the Coptic Church often toes the government line in order to protect its standing with the Egyptian government, which is predominantly Muslim. Is there anything similar to that in Nigeria? What role has the Nigerian church played in confronting or failing to confront this violence?
Well, Mike, in a word, absolutely there is. And it's unfortunate, but the churches in Nigeria are diverse. When the missionaries started to come into Nigeria in large numbers in the late 19th century, they divided the country according to themselves. The Roman Catholics were assigned to do the southeast and it's kind of the southern part. And the Church of the Brethren, they were told, well, you guys go out to Lake Chad, and that will be your territory. And they established thousands of churches there. And then the Protestants, they were told, you guys go to the North Central, go to Kaduna, and go to Katsina. That can be your territory. And so we have we have a distribution of churches like this. The Anglicans, they went to the southwest and into the Lagos area. So you have these dozens of competing churches who were dependent upon government patronage or government protection in a way, because it was dangerous for them to send out missionaries. And the government in recent decades has very successfully played some of the church leaders against each other, right? And they've made it very uncomfortable and very dangerous for top clergymen to criticize the government. When the top clergy do speak out, when they do criticize the government for complicity, the government punishes them by investigating their taxes, for example. There are prosperity preachers who are multi-millionaires who are susceptible for tax investigation, or they will scale back their privileges, stop them from visit. They won't give them visas to come to the United States, or they will, or things will happen against them. For example, when the very brave Bishop Nagbe, who's the bishop of Benue State, a couple of years ago, he came to the United States to speak to me and also to speak at a congressional hearing for the House Appropriations Committee or the Foreign Affairs Committee. And while he was gone, the terrorist forces in his state attacked his hometown. This is their way of punishing him. So there are all kinds of ways for the government to give privilege, to give access to special speaking, give access to the top government leaders. They can give funds, they can give land, they can give all kinds of blandishments to the church leaders who stay patriotic, and they can punish those who don't do that. But at the same time, there are prophetic voices who speak out at great risk of themselves. And I got to speak about one person, Pastor Ezekiel Dachomo, who's one of the leaders of the Church of Christ in Nations, who has presided over the graveside funeral services of hundreds and hundreds of villages where these attacks have happened. And Pastor Dechomo, who's a great friend of our founder of Truth Nigeria, has put his life at risk by speaking up boldly. And he said dozens of times that my people have been killed because of the complicity of the Nigerian army, because of the complicity of this government. He should be man of the year. He should be recognized as the personification of the courage of the church in Nigeria. He's not widely known enough. But Pastor Dechomo should be on the cover of Time magazine. And others like him are doing the right thing. However, I would say that in the last year or so, we see a progressively louder movement of voices of church leaders who are insisting that the church they're insisting that pastors speak out, bishops and priests speak out boldly about the Christian genocide, and we see it start to happen. There's actually going to be a demonstration on Saturday, June 20th, at the White House in Lafayette Park. On Saturday, June 20th, there's going to be a 2-hour rally of a group called Save Nigeria. It's a cross-denominational it's a coalition of folks who want our president, they want our Congress to take note of the Christian genocide and do more to sustain it.
Well, that brings me down to my final 3 questions. Number 1 is, what can governments do to help the Christians of Nigeria?
Well, let's talk about what government can do. It's a lot. First off, our government engagement can insist that the truth be told. Do what Donald Trump did in his first administration. When the president of Nigeria, who was an enabler of the terrorism, he was a warlord, and he was a leader of the Fulani tribe, and he came to Washington in 2017. He came, was it 2017? It could have been, he came to Washington, I think, in, he came in, I believe, May of 2018 in order to have a handshake with President Trump and to receive the purchase of fighter aircraft that his government needed in order to fight the insurgency called Boko Haram. And while he was meeting with Donald Trump at the White House, Trump, for whatever reason, had found out about a big massacre of Christians in Nigeria that had been exposed in USA Today. And so after he read this expose, and then he sat down with the president and asked President Muhammadu Buhari, he said, "Why are you allowing the persecution of Christians in your country? We've talked about this, we're going to talk about it again, and we're not going to tolerate this." Well, that wasn't in his talking points in the program that he had been given by his handlers. But the fact is, he embarrassed the president. And when President Buhari went back home, a very strange thing happened that I've been told about many, many times by Nigerian thought leaders, and that was that the attacks on Christians stopped for 5 months. They just didn't happen, and nobody knows why. But apparently Buhari put out the word that behavior should be changed, and it was changed for 5 or 6 months. What this incident showed is that when our government leaders speak the truth and they embarrass the government officials and notice what is obvious, then the Nigerian decision makers, they change behavior and they dial back the sadistic series of atrocities. So that's one thing. Secondly, the U.S. government can help. Go ahead.
No, continue. I was going to ask.
The other thing the U.S. government can do is ensure that the millions of Nigerian victims who are suffering in displaced persons camps, that they get humanitarian aid. Because currently There's 4 to 5 million Nigerians who are in displaced persons camps, and they're starving to death. They don't have proper shelter. Their children do not go to school. They're suffering the worst kind of privation. They can do that. Now, secondly, there's something else that can happen. The Western media can make an effort to understand the complexity of the Nigerian situation and have the compassion to go deeply into it and to see who are the real victims, and not simply accept the excuses and the false narrative that are given by people like the First Lady, who comes to the United States on a charm tour, and she invites reporters, from the cable news companies or from the prestige newspapers to, have a nice dinner with her at the Four Seasons Hotel or some other great restaurant, and hear her lax apologetic statements. The news media can take the pains to ignore the false narratives that are presented by the lobbyists who are hired with millions of dollars, $10 million. And just a few months ago, the Nigerian government has put down to finance their public image campaign by hiring slick lobbyists. And so the media can help by simply telling the truth. Third, what can citizens do? What can ordinary citizens do? They can do a lot. For example, if a citizen wants to help a family in Nigeria, they can do it. They can make common cause with a family in Nigeria by reaching out to one of the nonprofits that help people in Nigeria, and they can make friends, because Nigerians are in this country in large number. There are at least a million Nigerians living in the United States, and they are better educated and wealthier than the average American family. So Nigerians are all over the place. There's concentrations of Nigerians in Houston, Texas, in Dallas, Texas, in the Washington, D.C. area, in Chicago, and in Atlanta. So Americans can make friends with Nigerians who are part of thousands, tens of thousands of Nigerian churches in this country. Americans who want to help can make friends with the Nigerians in this country and ask them, how can we help people back home? Especially they should seek to make contact with Nigerians who have connections in the Middle Belt, where most of the killing zones are. The Nigerians who live in the southern part of the country, in the very large cities like Lagos, are less likely to even know about persecution because they don't see it there. So there are ways that individuals in the U.S. can help nonprofits who are doing constructive engagement back in Nigeria. For example, Equipping the Persecuted, the funder of our Truth Nigeria site, Equipping the Persecuted does incredible humanitarian work. It provides food and medicine and emergency shelter for the thousands and thousands of people who are made homeless by these attacks. Our founder, Judd Saul, goes to Nigeria on a regular basis, and he also helps stand up and train security teams who are not equipped with weapons, but they are equipped with walkie-talkies and with a bulletproof vest and with training so that they can enable their villages to escape attacks and to anticipate them before those attacks happen. So there are ways. There are many other good nonprofits that people can get involved with to help do to charitable work in Nigeria. I would say one thing is that a simple and very cost-effective way to help Nigerian people is simply to make contact by telephone. Make contact with suffering people in a war zone and pray with them. That's how I got started 7 years ago. I didn't know anybody in Nigeria. A friend of mine told me he knew of a Catholic priest in the Lake Chad area, and so I just called him up. And when I heard about his dire situation, the privation of the people in his area, and about the attacks that Boko Haram had done against people in the area, I just prayed with him by telephone. It was very easy. And he, as a result of that connection, he gave me contacts. He gave me actionable information about Boko Haram attacks in the area, which enabled me to write stories, which I was able to market to news media in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Burton, thank you so much. You've been incredibly generous with your time. You've answered a lot of questions that I had. Again, this is a subject that it's mentioned in passing a lot, but it very rarely, you have somebody that can go so in depth into it. So incredibly grateful to have had you here. Um, Thank you once again for tuning in. Before I let you go, Mr. Burton, where can people find you?
You can find us at truthnigeria.com, truthnigeria.com. And if you'd like to make a donation, and please do go to this site. It's called equippingthepersecuted.org. Go to equippingthepersecuted.org. That's one sentence. And go to the very last page of Equipping the Persecuted. There is a donation link there. And I strongly urge you to make a commitment to give a small donation every month. Give it electronically. It can be $10. It can be more than that. It can be a generous donation. But to give money every month, $12 a month, for example, $25 a month, is hugely helpful for our missionaries who are standing up these training teams and humanitarian relief efforts in Benue State and in Taraba and in Plateau states, where Christians are standing like Jesus at the foot of the cross, and they're losing everything, but they do it with a smile on their face and with the attitude that those who give their lives will lose their lives, and those who lose their lives will gain their lives.
Once again, Douglas, thank you so much. That'll do for today. Till next time, thank you for tuning in to the Clear Insights podcast.